welcome to this call. My name is Ryan Richards. I'm with a company called ServSmart. And this webinar is part of a series by the American Gap Year Association and the Building Bridges Coalition. So the American Gap Year Association is the source for all things gap year, programs, research, the college process, financial aid, and more. And Ethan Knight heads them up. And the Building Bridges Coalition is a consortium of organizations promoting international volunteering. I first got to know Daniela through her TEDx talk, which is brilliant and I'd highly recommend. And I started using some of the trainings that I was delivering. And that led me to subsequently find her delightful video series produced by Learning Service on different aspects of sort of how to not be a jerk in international service and how to partner effectively and wisely with the people you serve. So Daniela is the Deputy Director of the Skoll Centre for Social Entrepreneurship at Oxford Said School of Business. She's also the founder of PEPI, a Cambodian youth leadership organization, PEPI Tours, which is a developmental education travel company, and Learning Service, an advocacy group designed to help people rethink responsible international learning. She knows this stuff inside and out and has some real flair and insight. And I'm really excited that we have a chance to welcome her here. So welcome, Daniela.
Thanks. I never heard the videos being described as not help you not be a jerk, but I like that. Anyway, hi, thanks for joining us. I know webinars are not generally interactive, but let's feel free to make it so. So ask me any questions and hopefully I can touch on those things. So the reason I ask you that is actually when I start most workshops I do or tours that I run, education programs, I would use this framework, this 2x2, so about met and unmet needs, expressed and unexpressed. I should know who made the framework, and I don't. But and actually, when I do this with students or on trips in Cambodia, I will actually draw, in the dirt with my foot, just a big square divided into 4 parts, and have everyone start in unmet, unexpressed, and write down a sentence about what their expectations of the day are, of the workshop, presentation, or the week, trip, whatever it is, and then have them read out loud their expectations and move from unmet, unexpressed into unmet, expressed. I think I probably got this from Where There Be Dragons. I can't remember. But it's a powerful activity, helps everyone just kind of express their expectations, and then it allows you as the facilitator to address those things and actually say if you can or can't meet those. So what I'll always do is then ask the group, which of these 4 quadrants do you think people are in when they get divorced, quit their job, basically leave a relationship, or leave disappointed from an experience. So which one do you think it is?
I would think someone would leave a relationship because they're unmet needs. And then are those unmet needs expressed or unexpressed? I think it depends.
Yeah. So usually, it's more likely that there's frustration built up when it's unmet, unexpressed, right? Because and this actually relates a lot to cross-cultural communication. So a lot of people have unmet, unexpressed needs because they have expectations about how they think they ought to be treated, how they should be treated, why should I have to say that they should know better, they should know that I expect that. But actually by the act of expressing it diffuses the situation to be able to say, hey, you know what, I understand that that's your expectation, and actually here's why we can or we can't likely to meet that. So hopefully that's just a useful tool. So I'll do that in presentations, and then I'll say, there's a group of you who wanted me to talk about X, Y, and Z. I'm definitely going to touch on those things. The other people, I don't know if I'm going to do that in this time, but if that's really what you want to talk about today, I'm happy to stay afterward, or whatever that might be. Okay, so I'll just do a quick how learning service, key concepts, and then 10 trip design, and leave with some resources and Q&A. Yeah, so I guess I was invited probably to speak today mostly from my experience in this area, which was starting an education and youth leadership organization called Pepi, a travel company that funded the nonprofit called Pepi Tours, and then Learning Services, the education and advocacy arm that came out of that work. The organization broadly is celebrating, I guess, its 11th year anniversary this year, and I'm still involved, but not at all to the extent that I was before. And if anything, I'm mostly involved in learning service now, which is basically taking the learning that I had from 6 years in Cambodia and the last decade of this work, and trying to help others learn from our mistakes and lessons without having to repeat them themselves. So the nonprofit originally focused on giving things away, building schools. We built 6 schools, 50 classroom libraries, gave away hundreds of bags, hundreds of t-shirts, and you name it, pencils, pens, and shifted from realizing that actually schools don't teach kids. If you've seen the talk that or I think it's like a different talk that TEDx talk that I gave, I talk about how actually I'd rather study under a tree with a great teacher than in an empty building like the one that we built, and that actually the key to education is people, is investing time in people. So the organization shifted from giving things away to investing in people, now gives scholarships to university and has a learning center and does dream management classes for students in rural areas. This is a little visual that we made when we made a website called Investing Time in People a while ago, but that was kind of this idea of saying we were giving these Band-Aid solutions, and partially we did that because we were running this volunteer company. It was easier to give things away, and we realized after a while that actually we were putting the bike guy out of business by giving away all these bikes, and we were also creating situations where the mechanisms and systems to get some of the water filters and other supplies that we were giving away weren't going to be in place unless there was a financial incentive and an actual ongoing system that would exist even after our little volunteer delivery situation had finished. So the other thing we realized is that we were kind of saying false messages in our advertising and our marketing. There's a lot of websites, for example, and I think we definitely did this ourselves, that talk about provide clean water for a community, build a well, right? There's not a single well in Cambodia that, unless you're in a really rural area and probably near a clean fresh water, that is pumping out clean water. And actually there's been studies shown in Cambodia that the quality of the water at the pump has little to no impact on health indicators apart from our, because what doesn't matter how clean that water is with if it has no bacteria in it when it's coming out of that pump, that doesn't actually matter. What matters is it's clean when it goes into your mouth. And actually a lot of the pictures and images that we have of clean water are these yellow jerry cans, right? And that's just a breeding ground for bacteria. So we basically realized that we were kind of selling these solutions that sounded sexy and easy. Raise money, build a well, come volunteer. But the real nuances of development and international development and change had to do with longer-term solutions that involved people and involved relationships and involved education, and were going to take a lot longer than something that volunteers could do quickly. And it was also a lot harder to invest in people than it was to raise funds to invest in things, because you couldn't write people's names unless they're friendly friends of yours on people to say, oh, we've invested in education and someone's development. So the tour company used to be about building things. We painted lots of murals. There was a documentary made about our first year or so of work called Changing the World on Vacation, and it has really loud music and us dance parties and yoga classes and stopping school so the foreigners could come visit, and it's really a hard thing for me to watch. I haven't seen it in a number of years. But we realized we were kind of fostering this moral imperialism by saying you could just get off the plane and say, hi, I'm here to help you because I come from a wealthier place. And instead, who was being helped was the traveler themselves. And what we needed to do is have discourse and learning so that it could be, hi, I'm here to learn from you, how I can be of help. It's actually a timely conversation because I'm actually in Spain right now. I took the week off of work because I'm writing a report called Tackling Heropreneurship, which is basically a really similar situation in the social entrepreneurship space, but a whole other story. So, we're not that different, to be honest. But so we realized we need to shift from this idea of saving the world in a week to learn, grow, expand your mindset, expand your experience, apprentice to the problems that are going on in the world, and then shift how you live, travel, and give after you leave us. We shifted our vocabulary. Just the terms volunteers and beneficiaries automatically create a power dynamic. We stopped using words like villagers. I'm from the village of Briarcliff Manor. No one has ever called me a villager, right? We just realized that there was this implicit in our vocabulary, this sense of us being in a position of power and superiority. And we shifted our vocabulary initially from volunteering to service learning. And then even though, of course, a lot of organizations that call themselves service learning organizations, of course, are doing learning first approach. So it really is just a nuance in vocabulary. But basically what we said is if we switch this to learning service, instead of being about serving and learning along the way, it's about learning how to serve for the rest of our lives and trying to avoid this heropreneurship situation that I was just talking about before. So learning service is built on this idea that personal and global development are entirely interlinked. I'm sure you all have seen this, that there's extra vacation time at companies now if you're going to go volunteer, or extra accolades and rewards or whatever that might be for students who are taking time to go volunteer. And there's one thing if you're volunteering at the local shelter down the street from your house and learning as you go, but if a student is going to go abroad for 2 or 3 weeks and paint something, or another student's going to go abroad for 2 or 3 weeks and go on a learning trip, I think it might actually be better for the world if we fund, fuel, celebrate, and encourage that learning trip just as much, if not more, than what is sometimes a very superficial level volunteer trip. Because the reality is that the students are going to change the world not by what they do in that short trip, but in how they grow, how they learn. I mean, I know Rustic Pathways seems to be an organization that really embraces this as well, that it's about that personal development journey and the impact you have into the future. So we've made different models. We have a video about this online as well. And we did a lot of interviews with volunteers and potential volunteers and realized that almost all of them were saying the reason that they wanted to volunteer was either for personal global development reasons, but mostly because they were trying to answer this question of how can I do good in the world? That's about how can I and do good in the world, right? So what do I bring? How can I be of value? How can I add to this? And also, what does doing good in the world look like? How can I be involved in that? What are my options? The book that we are just hired an editor for, a second round of editing, who is also taking this week off, and she's doing editing for us from this week in parallel. But the book is framed around this motto, which is a translation possibly for the Vajra, which is that symbol. This is like a looking top down onto the Vajra, but it's a figure 8 symbol. Usually made of metal in Mahayana Buddhism, and one definition of it is action without learning is ignorance. Learning without action is selfishness, right? So if we go out into the world, get off the plane and say, hi, I'm going to fix your life, I'm going to help you, I'm here to save the day, right? Without learning, without asking questions, without having someone else define the problem and lead and then that's ignorance, right? But if we just sit around and learn and take pictures and watch and gawk and, you know, and examine poverty without then taking action in some way, well, then that's selfishness. So it's a constant balance between the two. So the three kind of pillars of the book are that we have to learn before we can help. The people we are supposedly serving are the ones that we need to learn from, and learning is lifelong. The book, it's divided into 6 sections, so even though action and learning are entirely interlinked, the first half is about learning about yourself, learning about the context of volunteering, and learning about your options, and then action. So basically the first half of the book is under the assumption that you haven't necessarily 100% yet decided if you're going to volunteer. You're trying to understand yourself, trying to understand where you might add value, you're trying to understand the context, what are the pitfalls of volunteer travel, what's the history of it, what are my different options out there, including learning trips, including other options apart from volunteering. And then the second half of the book is basically assuming that you've made a choice to go volunteer. Okay, so what do I need to do to prepare myself? What do I need to do while I'm abroad? And how can I transition that experience abroad into a lifelong approach to impact? This is just one look at kind of dividing up learning and action versus self and the world. And saying, actually, we don't need to get into this, but basically we need to understand ourselves, we need to understand the world, we need to build skills that are about, listening, how to, it depends on what the actual, maybe it's a language, whatever those skills might be that you might to add value, education work, whatever it might be. And then we also need to go out there and then take action, but we need to focus on all of these parts. I'm sure I don't need to explain this to you. We all already know this, but trying to counter this understanding that some people have a belief that the community goes out into the world and says, we need volunteers for us, right? And the reality nowadays with the growth in volunteer travel is that increasingly sending organizations are searching for places to send their volunteers. And when I was in Cambodia, we often got emails that said, we've got 4 students who are looking for a place to volunteer. Can they come work with you? So it's kind of this tail wagging the dog. We give some examples of kind of how do you think through my different options? Okay, what are my different learning options? We talk about the different types of volunteer offerings out there, give tools for how to compare and contrast those, look at how do you examine the specifics of a specific organization, what kind of questions should you be asking, and then what should you do to get prepared to go. Yeah, so in the talk that Ryan was speaking about, I talked about 3 ways I think we're failing young people right now. I think we're doing that in poverty overload, which is basically when we are not framing learning experiences, when we're sending young people abroad, or older people, anybody, abroad for the first time into emerging economies or areas where they might be exposed to different levels and gaps in wealth. And if we're not, in order to challenge that, we need to have education before, facilitated during, and after their travel experiences. With savior overload, it's basically this idea of, oh, I've done my part, look, I've done, I painted that wall, I built that thing, we did a great job, right? And even if we are painting or building, even though now as an organization in Cambodia we don't do that anymore, I would say that there still needs to be this humble, mindful, self-reflective attitude of understanding how our contribution fits into maybe wider long-term systems and how we can continue to add value long after whatever trip we've just been on. And then failure overload is if students go and they try and then they realize, oh my gosh, I thought this was going to be easy, I raised all this money, everyone donated for me to go volunteer abroad, and I've put a little wet paint on a really big problem. And so in order to counter that, we need to be really honest with the students and the people that travel with us and explain that learning is the goal, and the way that they're going to have impact is throughout their life. And that actually what we talk about is do no harm while you're abroad. Learn, build relationships, make connections, gain an understanding, and then make commitments to be able to continue to affect positive change after you leave. And if that's your measure of success, then you won't leave with as much of a, you will leave knowing there's still a job to be done, rather than feeling like you failed in a job that you thought was going to be easy and quick. So, quick 10 steps. We talked about this, focus on learning. Your number one risk management tool is your relationships. I'm sure anyone who's running a travel company would know this, not just volunteer travel. I definitely have to tip my hat to Where There Be Dragons on this one too. This is something they definitely beat into their, in a positive way, into their team members. But the number one risk management tool is your relationships, and especially when it comes to volunteer travel, there's so much more kind of, negative press coming out and people complaining. So in order to mitigate that happening to your company and your organization, you need to make sure that you really are promoting something that is, that is quality. And in order to do that, if you're not there and you're not, on the ground every single day in those places, you need to make sure that you have really strong relationships, and not just with one person. I know so many organizations that have, one example, for years they were giving out things, and I don't want to make it too clear who they were, but whatever, they were giving out these things, and after a few years they realized that the guy they've been paying to choose which families got the things was actually charging the families. So for years they had volunteers going on these trips thinking that they were, supporting impoverished communities through donations, and actually they were just charging middle-class families for the gifts that they're giving. Okay. In order to have those relationships, we can't be doing an anytime, anywhere volunteer any organization that's basically telling you you can go to any of 15 countries on any date that you want gives me a lot of red flags and question marks, because I just don't understand how they can manage that many relationships when I know it was very hard for me to do it in one country. Okay. I think we can all differentiate through transparency. By that, I mean that I think there's something that's missing in volunteer travel sometimes, is honesty about, people say, oh, a percentage of your funding is going to XYZ. And I think if we can just be more direct and honest about those numbers and the things, we can really both protect our reputation, but also create a change in the sector that I think is much needed, where people are really transparent and honest about where their money and time is going. Let's see here. Sorry. Okay. Avoid poor monitoring. We touched on that. I think volunteer feedback, this goes two ways. So number one is, if you hear some really negative things from volunteers, check it out, listen to it. Don't have this confirmation bias that is, I've done it myself, where people have said, oh, I really have questions about this orphanage or this organization. We supported an orphanage for a number of years before we realized that it was very corrupt and that our money wasn't going to the right place, and we didn't want to listen, So if you're hearing negative things from your volunteers, don't just say, oh, I've known Henrietta or Becky or whoever in whatever country for years. There's no way that could be happening there. Take it as, seriously and do some digging around. But on the contrary to that, I don't think volunteer feedback is enough to vet and say, oh, we think it's a good project, our volunteers say it's good, right? Because I don't think that volunteers often have the long-term view or the nuanced understanding necessarily, depending on who they are, where they're coming from, around what makes good development. They might have had a good experience. They might have had a positive, the show put on for them, as often gets done for any of us foreigners that come to visit projects. But we really need to be doing some good digging ourselves before we decide to partner with an organization. I touched on this already. I believe in projects that are investing time in people after having invested in lots of things. And I think that goes for both the projects that we choose to support and work with, but also in the travelers themselves. We try and focus on building empathy rather than sympathy, which means really getting to know people on these trips and talking through the different, one of the things we'll do is we'll talk about police officers. They'll come into contact with police officers who are stopping cars, and taking bribes sometimes. And we'll have these conversations where we're talking about, is that bad? And the students, oh, that's so bad. Why are they doing that? Da, 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 da. And then we say, okay, well, what if this system is in a way that on Fridays they work at that stop and they're expected to give a certain amount of money to the boss above them, and they won't get paid their salary, which is actually only $50 a month. It isn't even enough to live on, unless they do that. Are they doing the wrong thing? And let's go interview people. Let's go talk to people. But let's kind of build a more nuanced understanding and about why people are making certain decisions. So honest marketing, I think it's just a matter of like I said, selling the truth. We're not selling a chance to save the world in the week. We're selling a chance to learn, to improve yourself, and hopefully to improve the world through what you learn in that experience. We talked about this already. Avoid confirmation bias. That's really just saying it is very hard once you have built a relationship with an organization to be open to the fact that it might not be a organization. And I have seen so many people, I'm sure you've read things that, you could watch all the stuff that happened with Greg Mortensen when you looked at the Somali mom situation. I mean, that was something that for years people were trying to get out the story that this was a corrupt organization for years. But nobody wanted to hear it because there's so much confirmation bias from all the people that had donated to her, promoted her, written articles about her in the New York Times. Nobody wanted to peel that back. It was too painful for their own egos, right? And it's also, when you're running a travel company, too painful for your wallet, right? If you've sold trips to an organization that might be a gray area, might not be so good, it's so easy to just say, oh, let's not look under that rock, So we really need to be diligent about that. This is a message we always give our students. Remember, you vote with your money. Do you want more kids in the street? I'm sure you've read about in Thailand, there's communities that have these metal things around the women's necks, the long neck women. A number of these communities never did that practice before. It's for tourism, right? So basically, we are fueling the harm of women for our own enjoyment to take pictures if we're giving our money to these kinds of things. And don't forget the rest of your trip. Way too easy to just really focus on the volunteer part and then go stay. And we had this social enterprise trip from a university in the States that had organized their own trip, and they were really adamant about wanting to learn about social enterprises, visit social enterprises, all this stuff, and they stayed in the hotel that was owned by the prime minister and or his family in context. But if so we need to think about how we're spending the rest of our money as well. Align and measure towards the global change you believe in. So the talk that Ryan was referencing before is called Don't Plant Papayas. It's basically saying, there's a Cambodian phrase that's saying, if you plant papayas, you can't expect mangoes. And so if we are teaching short-term solutions, if we're making things super easy so that, we had teachers write us these emails saying, we want to make sure our students feel a sense of satisfaction and that they really see the project go from start to finish during the time that they're visiting, right? We're dumbing down aid to make it super easy for people so that they feel really good. And then if we do that, how are we going to expect them to take on the real global challenges that we face, which certainly are not easy and certainly do not take a short little trip to fix. So we need to make sure we're aligning the way that we act with the real changes that we want to see in the world. I haven't updated this in a while, but CoLab has some great resources. I don't know if you've seen their tools. We've made this Volunteerism 101, but it's actually now linked on the Learning Service website with a self-check tool for organizations, Child Safe Network for anyone doing work with children. If anyone knows me, they know that I'm really an active advocate against orphanage tourism. So read orphanages.no or some of the work done by Friends International. And then we, as Ryan noted before, we have videos and learning service toolkit on our website. And that is me. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, no, it was great and helpful to hear sort of the key points that you highlight on and reflect on them in relation to our work. One question I have, and I don't know if the programs that you lead now or the groups that you work with do direct service during the programs, but I would be interested to hear a little bit about what kinds of like on the ground direct service you think works better.
Yeah, it's a good question. We struggle with this a lot. So in Peppy Tours, we usually do not do direct service anymore, but we mostly work with schools, and a lot of international schools, and some of these schools have this like required component of international volunteer work, and so we do struggle with this. So some of the schools, I would call them the more enlightened ones, have allowed us to do kind of learning as service, as in like, let's go do interviews, let's go learn, and that will still contribute towards that component. Others, so one of the organizations that we work with in Cambodia is called CRDT, Cambodian Rural Development Team. There are so many homestay programs in Cambodia. It's like a homestay program party. And most of them, I would say, have one form of major issue or another, largely usually having to do with certain people benefiting and certain people not benefiting, and there just being really huge rifts in the community around where that money goes and who's being selected, and is it, the commune chief's cousin who gets to do the homestay, all of that stuff. So, but CRDT is one that we appreciate their approach, mostly because it was designed and founded by some Cambodian guys who studied agriculture. They think they started with like $100, really impressive what they've built and done, and they work with communities on a really long-term basis. And the area where they do this homestay and volunteer work is probably about maybe 4+ maybe hours at least, a long bus ride and then a boat ride out of Phnom Penh. And so it's A, less visited, and B, usually you're going for kind of a longer period if you're going to go all the way there. And the reason I think that project works better than some that I've seen is that it's a very organized, compared to others, a community organization where they've done a system where anyone who meets criteria ABC, let's say it's like they have to have a separate curtain to divide the room, and they have to have an extra mattress, and they have to have a plastic sheet up that covers an area for people to shower outside, and they have to have a toilet. Whatever those are, anyone who meets those criteria can be in the homestay family, and then they'll rotate through the homestay list so that everyone gets the same number of people visiting each year, so the money is distributed. If you can't meet those financial needs, you then the women or men, but usually women, can volunteer to be part of the cooking team so they can financially benefit from the travelers coming in. And then if you can't do that and you have a bicycle, you can lend your bicycle out to be rented. But basically, there's all these different ways. I don't think it's, nothing's perfect, but they have, it seems to me, a sense of a much more equitable sense of the community ownership around the program. Also, the projects themselves are going on constantly in the community, no matter if travelers are there or not. So as a development program, they are building fish ponds. They are doing biodigesters that are, creating gas energy from pig waste and things like that. They're building toilets. They're doing all those things no matter what, and they're not just kind of sitting around, or at least they didn't used to be when we were doing work there, waiting for the travelers to come. And I think that's that's a program that I believe in the organization. I'm happy for our money to go there. I always think it's important that your money is also going to back these projects for your time as well. And I also think it's a learning and development opportunity for our students around why do I think it's a good development project? Let's go learn about how this development project is working. And then, hey, they happen to be building a fish pond right now. Let's all, or planting rice, whatever. Let's get our hands muddy. But our service is not going to be the fact that we planted some rice, because, hey, they're going to have to probably fix what we do anyway, and we're really not that good at it. But our service will be what we do with this the rest of our lives, and how we learn and how we shift, and the way we live, travel, and give. But yeah, we'll let you get your boots muddy. But it's not service. That's not, you pat yourself on the back service. That's you learning about what other people are doing, and hopefully contributing in some way, at least leave no trace. But sorry, that was a really long answer. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, it's definitely helpful. I mean, I certainly appreciate the challenges of finding meaningful and effective ways to engage volunteers, yeah, that's what I spend my time thinking about. So it's helpful to hear your experience.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky because you also don't, that if you tell that school, no, sorry, because we've done that. Sometimes we say, sorry, we actually can't do any hands-on stuff. They're going to go somewhere else, and they're probably going to end up in some organization that's really letting them go to some orphanage and take pictures of kids and just so I want to prevent that, but I also don't want to fuel this I don't know. It's tricky, but I guess for me it's really just how is it framed, and if we frame it as this is going on, this is important work, let's try and add value, but actually the real value we're going to add is later, then I'm more on board.